It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
G'day, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm the parenting expert on Channel 9's parental guidance and the founder of happyfamilies.com.au. Thanks so much for joining me on this holiday edition of the Happy Families podcast. Today, a conversation with Alfie Kohn. He's one of our favourites on the podcast. He's one of my favourite authors. He wrote the book Punished by Rewards. He's also written The Homework Myth, the schools our children deserve, unconditional parenting, the myth of the spoiled child, feel bad education, no contest, and a whole lot of other books. They're all on my bookshelf. I've read them all. He is just wonderful to listen to, wonderful to read. And I asked Alfie in episode number 137 of the Happy Families podcast how he deals with a child who is acting up and behaving in a challenging way.
Talk less, ask more. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. Everything will depend on what's going on in this child's environment and in this child's head. 5 different kids who are seen as difficult or troubling or making us go crazy and pushing our buttons, maybe doing it for 5 completely different reasons. And each of those reasons calls for a different course of action. I mean, this is the thing when I wrote my book, Unconditional Parenting, which gets specifically to looking at parenting. Punished by Rewards also looks at schools and workplaces as well as families. But I had to, in the working with section, the what do we do instead, break the bad news that I'm not going to give you a magic formula. If a child is acting this way, rolling the eyes, because frankly, we're saying stuff that deserves an eye rolling, then the problem is not the kid. The problem is with what we have been doing that we need to rethink. And we need to come to the child and say, I'm really frustrated sometimes by your attitude here, and I want to hear where it's coming from. And then you have to listen for the answer without getting defensive or huffy. And then when there's a particular problem, like we want to get the house clean, I don't know about using a different technique to get the kids' room clean. I mean, it's the kids' room, isn't it? Why would the kid have to keep it up to our standards? In other words, the premise of the question here ought to be called into question. Don't ask, how do I get the kid to do X if I can't use punishments and rewards? Begin by asking whether X really needs to be done. But if we're convinced it does, like everybody should pitch in with stuff around dinner, then I would be asking the child, what's the problem here? What can be done? What do you think you can do in order to help things go smoothly? Whenever possible, kids learn to make good decisions by making decisions, not by following directions.
So much wisdom from Alfie Kohn. You can find a whole lot more in episode number 137. I recommend you go back and have a listen. I think you'll love the conversation. It really is outstanding. Your daughter just walked by, eyes glued to her phone, expression unreadable. You ask her to put it down, but she balks. You know it's not good for her, but you're not sure why or how to support better choices. In the webinar Pixel Perfect, I joined with psychologist and teen tech expert Jocelyn Brewer to discuss how to set screen boundaries that work for you and your daughter. Check out Pixel Perfect now on the Happy Families webshop. It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. G'day, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. The podcast returns for normal programming as of tomorrow. We're going to talk about whether or not we can teach our kids resilience and whether it's worth trying to teach it specifically in schools. Plus, later on this week, we'll also be talking about how we teach our kids the skills that they need to navigate life without us. Because let's face it, we're going to be redundant one day. We might as well do our best to get it right. I can't wait for you to join us this week as we get back into the Happy Families podcast and talk about all the stuff that is going to make your family happier. In the meantime, though, thank you so much to Justin Rulon, our producer of the Happy Families podcast, and Craig Bruce, our executive producer. If you'd like more info about making your family happier, you'll find it at happyfamilies.com.au.